I have spent a lot of my time making videos in defense of Overwatch. I made videos trying to explain how certain things work, videos that tackle community misconceptions, videos that comment opinions based on heated emotion, and with all these videos being made, it's not like the things I'm going to talk about today are anything groundbreakingly new. Sure, I might add some new perspective to a couple of them, but the gist of this video is to add a sort of closing sentiment to these videos that I've already made. That being that these problems, while I'm trying to explain where they come from, are never going to go away, at least that is what I believe. And I'm going to talk about why I think that way. A lot of the time people try to fix the game for the devs, so to speak. They propose things that seem very simple and add, how did they not think about this? Well, chances are that they did. Developing a game is an extremely complex endeavor, and our feelings and opinions as gamers often go towards wanting things to be fixed in our favor. And that without looking at the problems it would cause for the other groups of our community or in other aspects of the game. Even though I have spent as much time as I did talking about community misconceptions, and I have tried to explain why a fix is not as easy as you might think, I too have fallen victim to complaining about things that I was very well aware of are not that easy to fix. If you really think that knowing that something is stupid stops a man from doing it, you will be painfully mistaken. How often did I preach to not overextend your ranked sessions and to take a break when you're tilted? Well, here I am, one 7-hour stream later that I lovely dubbed the Tilt Fest of my memories, where I dropped about 500 SR in a single night and complained about all sorts of things. And I think that is a good point to start with. One problem that is never going to go away in Overwatch is the how the fuck did that guy get into my rating argument, or as I call it, the RNG factor. What I think illustrates perfectly how broken this argument is to begin with is the fact that my friend, who statistically is one of the better Genji players on ladder, had people call him, and I quote, literally the worst Genji I have ever seen. But why would they say that if statistics beg to differ? Well, that is because even one of the best Genji players on ladder makes mistakes. Even when you feel entirely confident on your pick, it doesn't always make sense. Sometimes you are feeling like you are doing an okay job, whilst another hero would do an even better job with much more ease, solely based on the factor of countering. But overconfidence is not the only factor at play. The reason I call this the RNG factor is because all we can do in solo queue is hoping that the matchmaking system gives us players that complement our skills, or to put it differently, put us into a team who would benefit from what we're good at. What you have to understand about Overwatch is that the perception that a player in a certain rating needs to be good at thing XYZ is completely false. Some players might be able to get into Master solely based on their superior positioning and good communication. Another player might be an amazing shot and can do a lot of damage if supported properly, but was unfortunate to get into teams who had trouble with coordination. Meaning the player in question would never be able to show their skills because their team didn't offer what he needed to succeed. Or to put it differently, his skill set is not what his team needed to win. Bottom line is that any player can make them to a high rating so long that two factors are in their favor. Number one, they are really good at least one thing, whether it be aiming, positioning, or anything else. And number two, matchmaking puts this player into teams who strongly benefit from their particular skill set. Obviously, this is a gamble where you can increase your chances of success by acquiring as many skill sets as possible. But the idea that a player in rank Diamond Plus, for example, needs to go through a checklist of things that they're good at is absolutely silly. The only thing they need to provide is the filament that their respective teams need to be successful in their respective matches. And that is in big part reason why we stumble upon scenarios that make us wonder, how did that guy even get into Masters? This is a problem that is never going to go away simply because of the way Overwatch was designed. It is extremely team reliant with an extremely diverse cast of heroes who all have their own skill sets, utility, and benefits. If you don't like that being a thing, you might want to look for something else to play. As difficult as this pill might be to swallow, it is probably also a reason for all the cynicism players in higher ratings have. A lot of these people have worked really hard to get their rating and improved a lot over the seasons. They did all that in hopes of getting a more consistent gameplay experience, but ended up dealing with the same RNG bullshit they had in lower ranks. Next to that, we obviously have the life factors. The player in question might just be tired or exhausted from work, maybe they're drunk, or maybe they're just distracted. There is a plethora of reasons why an entirely consistent gameplay experience in regards to your teammates and what they know and are capable of doing simply cannot exist. But that is not the only problem I believe to never see a satisfying fix for the entire player base. Because we also have hero balance, and that, my friends, sees a lot of discussion all around the ladder, and that rightfully so. As mentioned just a minute ago, we're dealing with an incredibly diverse cast of heroes who are pretty difficult to balance in relation to each other alone, but even more so in relation to the mechanical skill at display when looking at the different divisions on the Overwatch ladder. A hero that might be absolutely destroying the lower end could see little to no playtime in the higher end because they know how to deal with them. Adding player perspective to that, and we're dealing with a massive shitstorm. For one thing, heroes are not always as broken as players make them out to be. An old example of that could be Reaper. Right now, he's universally universally considered one of the worst heroes currently in the game by higher ranked players. But give him a nano boost, a Lucio speed boost, and a Zarya bubble together with his zone ultimate, and suddenly he looks like a god. Point being that any hero can seem broken if you build your entire team around them, or even if they're just being properly supported. What is important to note in this discussion is how their impact evolves throughout the divisions. As much as we would love to have the devs fine-tune heroes according to the exact rank that we currently play in, that is an incredibly selfish demand given how much that could mess up balance in pretty much every other division. Striking a balance between fixing what is actually broken and fine-tuning things that players perceive to be broken is quite difficult. Not to mention that some things in the game are simply broken by design, but it's not like they can just remove entire heroes out of the game because of it. A good example of that is Pharah. Pharah is a hero that, in relation to other DPS heroes, requires very little effort to be effective. That wouldn't be a massive problem. After all, we also have Junkrat, for example. He too can throw out tons of damage with very little effort. The problem occurs when you pair high reward for low effort with a hero design that makes them very difficult to counter. Junkrat is a 200 health hero with very limited mobility who does not require a dedicated counter pick. You can often just kill him simply by out-damaging him with various heroes in different scenarios. If you look at most other heroes, it pretty much functions that way. But in addition to that, you also have direct counters. Winston counters Widowmaker, Reaper counters Winston, McCree counters Reaper, and the list goes on and on. In most of these cases of hero counters, the game has been deliberately designed to create a problem that is easily fixable solely by picking a certain hero. And in the case of Pharah, the only counter is good aim, not the most mainstream of all skills to have in a game as popular as Overwatch. Adding to that the fact that McCree's and Soldier's damage fall off makes it extremely difficult to counter Pharah, who, being the smart player that she is, keeps her distance while simultaneously raining down tons of damage, and that with no fall off whatsoever, you find yourself in a situation where the only viable counter is Widowmaker, a hero who takes disgusting amounts of mechanical skill to be effective with. And I mean that in relation to the entire team comp, because remember, we're not talking about a 1v1 scenario here. In most cases, it won't be enough to have a player pick Widow and only shut down Pharah to win the game. A good Widowmaker needs to be landing her shots consistently to be useful, and that is extremely difficult. Alternatively, teams in lower ratings have to adjust their entire team comp to feature as many hitscan heroes as possible to have any chance of combating her whatsoever, which for a hero who grants as much benefit as she does for as little effort as she requires is simply broken from a design perspective. Ultimately, the only way to combat this problem was to make Soldier outperform McCree, because most lower ranked players do not have the skills necessary to display the level of precision that they need to be effective with either Widowmaker or McCree. So now we have Soldier 76, who has vastly superior mobility, self-sustain, burst damage on the cooldown, an ultimate that is worlds better, and a far more forgiving main weapon than McCree. The redeeming factor that McCree should have compared to 76 would be a higher damage output or a lesser damage falloff to put him in line when it comes to a performance rewarding kit. The problem is obviously that a McCree that could snipe people over longer distances while being a good counter to Pharah would be absolutely broken on the higher end of the ladder, where players do land their shots more consistently and Pharah sees far less playtime as a result. Now we ended up with a McCree that feels half-baked compared to Soldier, with Soldier himself needing to feel broken compared to McCree because it is the only thing that can combat Pharah in lower elo. Now I just want to summarize this really quickly because some people really like to feel offended whenever I talk about Pharah. Pharah is a hero that objectively requires very little effort to show any level of effectiveness, whereas most other DPS heroes require at least some level of skill to be considered effective at all. That does not mean that there is no finesse to her gameplay. When trying to perform in a higher elo, using her mobility and positioning yourself smartly is key, and that is something that I do give credit for. It is, however, also a fact that Pharah dominates lower elo play because her counter needs to show exponentially more skill with their hero than she needs to show with her own. Countering Pharah is not as easy as to just picking up the appropriate hero and going to town. You actually need to be good at it, and that even in lower elo. If you then add the fact that all a good Pharah player needs to do is shut down the hitscan hero on the enemy team to make herself virtually untouchable, then I hope you see how this becomes a problem from a design perspective. And you might mention things like Roadhog's hook or lucky shots from projectile heroes, but none of these are reliable counters, especially not against good Pharah players. And if we go back to our Reaper example, it took a lot of coordination and the abilities of 3 other heroes alongside of his own ultimate to consider him a big problem. While thanks to the massive damage falloff on most hitscan heroes, just having 2 people decide to play Pharmercy already makes it infinitely more difficult to shut her down. And that is a higher elo problem as well, since this is where we're dealing with actual actually good Pharah players. And as much as I love seeing Pharah mains getting a knot up in their panties over me saying shit like this, there is an undeniable outcry from lower elo players who are sick and tired of seeing this hero in virtually every single match, forcing them to build their entire team around the idea of countering her. And for me in my own matches and masters, as a support main, I've just lost the only viable method of dealing with that problem since Ana's damage has been nerfed. This resulted in Pharmacy becoming even more popular. All I can do now is hoping that my hitscan heroes are good enough to deal with that, which even if they are, they're having a terrible time trying with all the dive comps stopping them. Or really, the only thing it takes is Pharah focusing them first. If after considering all these things you still think Pharah is perfectly fine as is, then I'm sorry, but I care no bit for your opinion, because you're obviously delusional. And of course, you are free to think the same of me too, to each their own. But I hope to have shown how difficult it is to balance heroes for all different levels of skill on ladder with this very in-depth example. And to end this video off on a quick point, toxicity. Toxicity is never going to go away, especially in very popular games. There are a lot of reasons for why people get toxic. Some people may be on a losing streak, others might just lose a bunch of games because others trolling, some people might not be able to take the heat of the ranked environment, and others might just be assholes. I encourage you to report players who are toxic whenever possible. Excusing it with maybe they're having a rough time in real life or maybe they have a good reason to be angry is honestly dumb in my eyes. Even if you are having a shit time at home, that does not give you the right to let it out on strangers, even on the internet. There are still real people behind those monitors. So what, did your mom never teach you any manners? The point is not to ban everyone who dares say anything mean even once, because your single report is not gonna cause that. The point is to get rid of players who are constantly being toxic, because chances are that they do it for the heck of it. And even if they don't, those are not the kinds of players that either most of you nor Blizzard wants to see in their games. So don't be shy to report somebody who's been toxic. If they just had a bad day, nothing's gonna happen. If they are being an asshole on a regular, then chances are that they will get banned, and that is how it should be. So let us quickly summarize what we have been talking about today. Achieving a perfectly consistent matchmaking experience is absolutely impossible solely based on how the game was designed and its heavily team-reliant nature. Adding that some people can't perform at the best of their capabilities at all times because they're feeling tired or exhausted or maybe they're being distracted, we got ourselves a fine list of things that answer the question of, how did that guy ever get into my elo? Perfect hero balance is another thing that we shouldn't ever hope to see the light of day. Not because the devs are stupid and don't know what they're doing, but because we're dealing with widely ranging levels of skill all across the ladder, and what's considered broken and overpowered varies depending on who you ask. It is very difficult to balance things out between what players consider to be broken and what actually is broken. Overwatch has been in development for a very long time. Things that may have seemed fine earlier could have only shown to be a problem once a much larger player pool has gotten their chance to get their hands on it. Whatever the case may be, we have to accept whatever the devs deem appropriate one way or another. We can and should voice our opinion, but don't expect them to listen to every last bit of it, because most of us lack the perspective of a developer, and that includes people like me who make videos on the internet. And lastly, people will always be toxic. That is not an Overwatch specific problem, that's a problem with humanity. Just report their asses, don't excuse shitty behavior and hope for the best. But this is me done for the day, so I talk about a few problems in Overwatch that I don't believe will ever be fixed to everyone's satisfaction. If you enjoyed the video, do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out, subscribe if you want to see more, and I hope to see you all next time.
None on me.
Are you serious?
No, fuck it. Watch it.
Hold on, do you actually want the... I'm gonna do it, dude. I'm gonna do it.
No, he still one-shots people.
Let's go!
Get in there. Get back in the fight.
Get the fucking shield down.
I regret my choice. I super regret my choice.
Shield fuck me, man. Man, I can't...